Hello and welcome to the On the Record portion of the Rockbridge Report. I'm Alicia Budich, and my guest here today, I'm honored to have Dan Rather on set.
Thank you.
Welcome to Washington and Lee in Lexington, Virginia,
I'm glad
Dan.
to be here again.
First question, you've covered a lot of elections. You've had a lot of memorable moments. What was your favorite election?
You know, the next election is always my favorite election, but I want to answer the question. The first national election I covered, 1952, Adlai Stevenson versus Dwight Eisenhower for the presidency. I didn't cover much in a remote area, but you always remember the first time. The 1960 election, John Kennedy versus Richard Nixon, was a memorable election, and the tumultuous year of 1968. And then the 2000 election, Gore versus Bush, and all of that entailed. Those were among the most memorable.
Memorable or enjoyable? Are they the same thing?
For a reporter, that's generally one and the same thing.
Your first election you covered, campaign spending was already a big deal. Since then, it's gotten astronomical. I think the Post reported last week campaign spending in a midterm race was in the tens of millions of dollars in 1 week.
About $4 billion. This midterm election in 2010, when all is said and done, there'll be about $4 billion spent when it's all totaled up.
What does that mean to voters?
Well, it should mean a lot of concern to voters. What it means to voters is that not everyone who contributes to a campaign, but when you're talking about that much money, the central question in the campaign is who is giving what money to whom, expecting to get what. And what it means to voters is when they're able to answer those questions, if they're able to answer them with the help of the press, it will tell you a lot of who's going to get favored for regulation, regulations put in, regulations stopped, legislation passed or stopped. It's going to tell you a lot about the direction of the country. The problem is that much of the campaign spending is not transparent, that voters have no idea where the money's coming from. It also tells voters that they as individuals are going to mean increasingly less to whoever's elected, because the people elected will be dealing first and foremost, and sometimes almost exclusively, with the people who gave heavily to their campaigns.
Outside spending obviously becomes a huge issue in this race. Just in the district next door to us, we have one of the biggest outside spending in the 5th district. Do voters see this? And are reporters doing their job telling people from outside your district are coming in and running this race for you and they're picking the winner?
Well, no, I don't think most people see it or think about it. And no, reporters are not doing their jobs, and I don't accept myself from that criticism. There's not nearly enough reporting on that. But let's clearly differentiate what we're talking about here. It's impossible to stop outside spending, if you say spending from people outside the district or even outside the state. Now the conversation has expanded to people outside the continental United States, foreign countries contributing. And none of that is transparent. It's very hard to find out where the money comes from. I consider this a matter of really deep concern for the future of the country. I know that sounds sort of preachy, but if you have $4 billion with a B poured into campaign, you have to start asking yourself these questions. If my son and daughter and grandsons are going to have the kind of country that my parents and grandparents bequeathed to me, then we have to do something about this. And I do think the public is beginning to center a little on this key question of who gives what to whom, expecting to get what, but not nearly enough, and there's not nearly enough press coverage. Press coverage, including much of my own in the past, I'm sorry to say, centers on the horse race. Who's up or down on the polls? There's far too much emphasis on the polls, too much money, too many resources, too much time spent on who's up and down in what poll, and not nearly enough on who's giving these huge sums of money and what will they get for it.
How do we reverse this trend? The horse race is what's exciting. Court cases like Citizens United are making it even harder and harder to make it transparent. Is the trend reversible? As a young journalist, I'm only going to get my stories on when I talk about the really exciting or really awful television ad.
Well, a lot of this depends on those of us who are in journalism, just asking ourselves, let's get back to some basic questions. Why did we get into journalism? There are a lot of reasons, but I think most journalists get into journalism because they want to feel a part of something bigger than themselves. Journalism, quality journalism of integrity matters. It is the red beating heart of democracy and freedom. So a lot of it starts with journalists. Why are we in this business? What is it we want to do? And now you say, as a young journalist, yes, you go to work at a small station, a newspaper, and you're assigned stories. But up and down the line in journalism, we just have to begin to ask ourselves, when are we going to get back our guts? When are we going to get back our spine? We need a spine transplant. So the second thing is the public needs to start asking some tough questions. First of all, of the candidates in the campaigns, but also of the journalists. Why are you spending every other day reporting to me about a poll? Tell me who's giving this money and what they expect to get for it.
How do you get your spine when your parent companies are donating millions and millions of dollars to certain sides?
Key question, something I intend to speak about when I'm here at Washington Lee, that increasingly we have more than 80% of our national news distribution is controlled by no more than 6, and I think 4, very large international conglomerates. And these conglomerates, there's probably a gentler way to say this, that they are, big business is in bed with big government, and they serve each other's purposes. And until we reverse that trend, we need more diversification in our principal national distribution of news. I know there's an argument that says, well, wait a minute, we have the internet and that's diversification. I agree with that. But in terms of national distribution with the largest audiences, the largest networks, and the largest newspapers, as I say, no more than 6, and my own count is 4 big companies control more than 80% of it. And that trend simply has to be reversed. And that begins with individual citizens saying to their congressmen and their elected representatives, listen, this is not right. We're not getting the kind of coverage we deserve. We don't like big business being in bed with big government. I don't care whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, Tea Party member, or a mugwump. That's not the American way.
Is it easier or harder for Americans to say that now with technology? You've seen a lot of technology in elections and everywhere else. Easier as a citizen to react or harder?
I think it's easier to react. I think it's a little harder to have impact because of the influence, I've said before, of the huge special interest money. Like a tsunami, it's just overwhelming the entire system. So you can get up on a website, get up on the internet, write a letter, do whatever you want, but you're basically going to be shouting into a wind tunnel. And that big wind, the tsunami, comes from the big money. It's increasingly hard to do. But you know, I'm an optimist by nature and by experience. And I think when Americans get onto this, and they're beginning to get onto it, listen, we don't want a country run by corporations. We want a country run by governments. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not anti-business. I'm not anti-entrepreneurial, anti-capitalist. But I think we all know somewhere deep down in our hearts that these very large corporations in many ways now run the country. And the time will come, perhaps it's upon us now, when this will be reversed. In my personal opinion, it can't come too soon.
Coming too soon, the elections are coming up entirely too soon. Back every election you ever anchored or covered, especially all your anchoring, you said, go out and vote. Why does that appeal so personal to you, and you made it so sincerely?
Well, I'm a great recipient of the American dream, and I want to keep it alive. And if we don't vote, and most people in this country who are eligible to vote don't vote, we've reached a point where if 40% of eligible voters vote in a given election, that's considered to be big. I think it may be time to consider changing election days from Tuesdays to perhaps Saturdays or Sundays. And I'm slow to come around to this, but there are countries where it's required of you, if you're of age and eligible to vote, and it may be necessary to do that, but there's no getting around it. If we continue to decline the percentage of eligible voters who actually go to the polls, then we will continue to reap the whirlwind.
Well, thank you very much. I hope that
Well,
most Rockbridge County members get out and vote.
Thanks.
And thanks so much. That's it for our On the Record portion. We'll see you next Thursday.